But first, Roger begins with the latest sequel in a series of grisly horror films.
Our first movie is the third in a series by director George Romero that began back in 1967 with a low-budget cult film, Night of the Living Dead. That movie told the story of a race of ghouls that had inhabited the earth and were devoting their lives, or maybe I should say their deaths, to lurching around and eating large chunks of healthy living human beings. The first movie was followed in 1980 by Dawn of the Dead, and now comes Day of the Dead. It continues the story as a small band of survivors huddle in an underground storage area beneath Florida and try to perform experiments on captive ghouls. In this scene, there is growing tension between the scientists and military men.
What are you talking about? Make them behave. What does that mean?
It means keeping them from wanting to eat us, for one thing. It means keeping them in check. It means controlling them. Controlling them.
When are you going to show us something that we can understand?
Very close, very close. I think in a matter of weeks...
I don't think there's any way you can tell how long anything is going to take. It could be months, it could be years before we know exactly what we're dealing with here.
Sarah's research is more esoteric than mine. She's looking for a way to reverse the process, a way to eradicate the problem. It could take a long time, a very long time. She may never find what she's looking for.
That scientist's nickname is Frankenstein. He's learned to train the ghouls to do simple tasks like this good student he calls Bub.
It's empty, Captain. We saw the bullets come out. Let's see what he does. Let's see what Bub does in this situation.
Bub is a real quick student. He has a lot of fun, too, with a Sony Walkman, which he enjoys.
This is very good because you would want to train Bub, of course, to learn how to shoot a gun. That would be very important.
That's one of those scenes where when you see it in the movie, you can bet your entire paycheck that by the end of the movie, Bub's going to have a gun that does have bullets in it. If Bub looks a little unappetizing there, though, you ought to see the rest of this movie because Romero has pulled out all the stops and turned Day of the Dead into a real bloody, gory geek show where things like cannibalism, disembowelment, and evisceration are pretty much routine, everyday sorts of things. The movie alternates those gruesome scenes with a very talkative plot in which the angry military man makes endless threatening speeches against the civilians until eventually, of course, it's free lunchtime for the ghouls. I thought this movie was a real disappointment, especially after Dawn of the Dead, which I admired very much. It lacks the high energy and the ruthless anarchy of that earlier movie, and it gets bogged down in a lot of overacted speech-making and recycled special effects.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. This is an awful film, actually, I think. The Dawn of the Dead was the one set in the shopping center and had a lot of comments on the shopping mall as a very arid, death-like place and kind of creepy.
In this movie, they say all the shopping malls are closed.
Right.
So we have this one-set movie.
One-set movie in a basement, which is really exciting. Comment on basements, I suppose. Actually, this film is like a trip to a rendering factory. I mean, or a bad butcher shop. That's all you see is just blood and guts being thrown across the floor of the garage or wherever they shot this picture. And there's really not much more to it. And from the actor's point of view, I would think the actors would be smarter than this. And that is, if you start screaming in the first scene of the movie, you have no place to go.
You have nothing left. And also, another thing about the characters, the first two movies, we had a lot of sympathy for the surviving human beings.
Yes.
Will they escape the ghouls? Will they hang in there together? Will they cooperate? This movie is filled with a lot of nastiness and hostility and anger among the human beings who are fighting with each other while the ghouls just kind of shuffle on and rip their arms apart and shuffle off again, so that there's nobody for us to really get behind.
Nothing, except behind the movie and behind the door of the theater showing the movie.
We both voted thumbs down on the overacted and talky Day of the Dead, the least successful of George Romero's ghoul movies.